Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network.
I'm Ryan.
I'm Amanda.
And we're your hosts.
We're a traveling couple and digital nomads taking you on our adventures as we explore locations, destinations, and careers.
Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to this episode of the World Wanderers podcast. We're really excited and grateful that you decided to join us with your ear time today. Today we're really excited about the interview we have to share with you. We have recurring guest and friend of the show, Andy Corbley, back on the show once more for the first time in a couple years.
Yeah, and for those of you who aren't familiar with Andy, he's a traveler and a writer, and he's also the founder of World at Large News, which is an independent news outlet that covers conflicts and world events, travel, health, and other topics. And he is also the pretty new author of an awesome travel log, I guess you could say, called On the Face of It, A Traveler on His World. And so in today's episode of the show, we kick things off by hearing where he's at. We hear how life has changed for him over the last couple of years since we had him on the show last. Like Ryan said, it's been a couple years since he was on the podcast, and he's had some pretty significant life changes. So he catches us up on life and travel. And then we really just dive into his book. We talk about the process of writing, what that was like, and what you can expect from the book. And one of the things that we were really excited about with this, because if you follow the show, you know, we don't do a lot of interviews and episodes on people specifically about books. But just the way he went about writing this and how this is a little bit of a unique take on a travel book, which knowing Andy, we wouldn't expect anything different. So really excited to dive in with this, and hopefully you guys enjoy as much as we did.
So without any further ado, here is Andy.
Andy, welcome to the podcast today. We're really excited to have you here with us.
Well, thanks. It's a real pleasure to be back.
Yeah. And where are you joining us from? Are you in the same place that you were back in 2022?
I think I'm in a very, very small town in northern Italy, which is more and more as time goes on. It's pretty much our house, but it's not our house. It belongs sort of in the family. But we live in a town where it's so provincial that if you come into it with €5 in your pocket, you will leave with €5 in your pocket because there's not one place to spend
it. Okay, that's good to know. Very interesting. And so I was looking, the last time we had you on the show, it was like the spring of 2022. So it's been a little minute since we chatted with you. I know we've obviously got a big topic to talk about with the new book that you released, so we're excited to get into that. But I'm curious if maybe you can catch us up. Like, what does your last almost 2 years look like since we chatted?
Well, I had resolved, based on a challenge issued to me by a young African man, to write a book in the lead up to my 30th birthday, which coincided with the birth of my son. So 2023 saw only modest travel experiences because I was becoming a father for the first time, and I was writing the book. So other than that, I couldn't just leave it at no trips. But we did go to Sardinia, which I'd never been before, or Sardinia. And that was really nice, but that was just like a family vacation. So in terms of visiting, I went to Estonia briefly, but the big trip was to Azerbaijan.
Wow.
And like so many trips, I could barely remember why I picked Azerbaijan. It just sort of happened that I was looking for plane tickets that weren't crushingly expensive for that period, which was October, and saw that I saw Georgia first, and I thought, do you know what? I know I've picked up a lot of information about Georgia in my life. It seems like an amazing place to visit. Then I looked to the left and I saw Azerbaijan, and I had this thought in my head. I said, I don't know anything about Azerbaijan. So I've got to go to Azerbaijan instead. So went there, had a B plus. It was like a B plus trip. Wasn't one of the legendary memorial ones, but there was a lot of things that were just strange that I had never seen before. The country has a fascinating history because it seems to be split like in a perfect 33.3% between three major ethnic groups. And those three major ethnic groups today also kind of form a major, probably one of the most geopolitically significant choke points on the global stage. So it's a country with it's just an awful lot going on. And Baku, the capital, was absolutely stunning. But after Baku, the level of wealth declined precipitously. But it was a really interesting trip, a time to test out my new camera and kind of express myself and relax. And after I had finished the trip, birth of my son, it was a bit of R&R. So I didn't push myself as hard as maybe I usually do to kind of find the hidden, angles and nuggets.
Yeah. Have you been back to the States at all?
No. I went for Christmas last year. But aside from that, there's Christmas, my brother's wedding, Christmas twice and my brother's wedding. So I haven't been to the States since really of any substantial time since 2019.
Okay. Wow. And so how long have you been living in Italy then?
That'll be 4 years and 20 days.
That's very precise.
Well, we're really near the 4-year anniversary, so it was pretty easy, but...
Okay. It's like, do you have a countdown going? No, that's amazing. So over 4 years by the time that this goes live. And so I'm curious for you, I want to hear more about this, like this challenge that you got to write a book and deciding on a topic and all types of things. Fill us in a little bit on the book and we can talk about it a little bit more.
I think it's a pretty cool story, but 2019, November, I had achieved a job that allowed me to work from my computer. So I sold everything I owned, this is the old story. And I was just going to go travel, and I didn't plan beyond the first 3 countries. I picked Namibia, Ghana, and Morocco. And in Namibia, I met the woman who would become my wife, so that changed everything. But I also met a young man named Augusto, who has a close relationship with my wife. And he was staying with her at the same hostel where I was and asked her to invite me to dinner, which was really strange because I was homeschooled. And so when this like beautiful blonde European woman comes up and invites me to dinner, I'm like, what is going on here? But he had heard that I was a journalist from Washington, D.C., because I was talking to a Canadian economist the previous night and thought that he would really like to meet me. And one of the first things he asked me was, are you going to write a book? And he didn't know almost anything else about me, but I just found I loved that expression, right? Children go immediately for the expression. They don't worry. And it's wrong even to say children because he was 16 at the time. But I thought that if that's what people from now on are going to think of me when they see me, I have to make a substantial effort to reflect that, admiration. And so I essentially just lied to him. I just said, well, I was thinking of traveling until I turned 30 and writing a book about the first 30 countries I visited on my 30th birthday. And he said that was a great idea. And I thought, yeah, it's a pretty good idea. And then I was coming up to my 30th birthday, and I haven't visited 30 countries yet. My path I took a different path in life and haven't been able to be one of those, those Anthony Bourdain, Henry Rollins types that inspired me so much to start traveling in the first place. But I thought, you know what, I'm just going to write a book anyway. And there were a bunch of other reasons. One of them was, and maybe you guys can speak a bit to this, is that I felt like I had so many little moments of insight and inspiration and little views into the human condition and cultural enigmas that I felt if I just left my brain to absorb another 5 years of this, I probably wouldn't be able to do each little tidbit justice. So I wrote the book to be able to put everything I had experienced up until that point down and not have to worry about diluting them in the future when my memories of them are less sharp, or with another 20 other instances of note. Because I think it's important to highlight, if you care enough about something to write a book about it, you should do that topic justice and not just try to cram as much. The book actually came out kind of small, which kind of annoyed me, but I didn't want to just keep cramming stuff in it for it to become too scattergun.
Yeah. So how did you get, like, once you were like, hey, life's taking a bit of a different path, but I want to follow through with this. I want to write a book before I'm 30. What was the process like? How did you settle on like, hey, which idea am I actually going to go ahead with? And then what was the writing process like?
That's kind of a good question because I didn't know exactly what I was going to write about. What hope would I have to make any money off this book if I was going to write about travel, right? How many books have been written on travel? You have to have, I've written over almost 4,000 journalistic pieces in my career. And so I understand that you have to have a hook of some kind. You can't just, even if it's the most wonderful story in the world, you have to have some story in it. And so I just started writing down kind of in an essay style, things that I had remembered that I always wanted to say. For example, I go on in the book a great deal about contradictions because after a decade in almost 30 countries, I felt I had seen in the world contradictions that upset me. Not upset me, emotionally, but intellectually. I'm a guy who cares a lot about intellectual consistency, empathetic consistency. And as I would travel to countries, further and further abroad, more and more kind of remote, I would notice things like that would just stick in my mind. And so I started just by writing some of these down, and it grew into a case of where, how can I kind of link these together? And it was when I started linking them together that I actually scrapped the whole idea and came up with a new project, which was to describe. There is a moment, and you guys will probably know what I'm talking about. I think all travelers listening will know where I'm talking about. There's a moment that happens when you're traveling, and it's so difficult to describe, where it might not happen for days after you arrive in a foreign country, but you're kind of going around, you're eating, you're seeing things, you're doing, and then something will happen, and you'll go, oh, now it's on, now it's happening. It's kind of like what people talk about being in the zone or entering a flow state. You enter this moment where like everything seems more than it otherwise would be. And so after I had just kind of thrown some ideas at my Microsoft Word documents, I resolved myself to describe that question, because I felt, and some people had conveyed this information to me, that perhaps I had the ability to express that feeling in words. And so that's what I began to do. And other parallel missions spawned out of it. So, for example, I wanted to investigate how the traveler is affected by the world, but also how the world has been affected by travelers over time. And who are travelers? Who are the people that just are drawn to this activity? Why are they drawn to this activity? Is it nature? Is it nurture? How far back in time did human cultures somewhat venerate the traveler? We have many famous travelers in our canon, like Marco Polo, obvious case. But it didn't start with Polo. It started, long before that. So that was the book. And then in the second half, I just kept at it. I thought, let's leave no stone unturned. Let's examine how all of the common forces in our world affect travelers and how are travelers affected by them. And at the end of the book, I looked back and I thought to myself, this is a thing that I bet you could give to any 23-year-old and change the course of their life and convince them that, not only is a gap year something fun, but it could be the most critical activity they'll ever partake in, So that's pretty much how it went about. It was chopping and changing, but what I'm really pleased, even though it's a bit short, I'm really pleased that it doesn't read like an essay, which is because I started out kind of writing in an essay style, but I'm glad it didn't feel that way to my editor. It hasn't felt that way to some people who've read it. So I'm really proud of it personally. And I'm also really proud that I left enough room to one day, many years from now, write a much, much thorougher version of the same sort of book.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's so cool to hear. And so I'm curious if you can kind of walk us through the process of okay, I've written this thing now. What did you do next in terms of actually getting this published?
Well, one of the things I didn't want to do is I've done a lot of passion projects in my life, and I didn't want this to just become another thing for me. I wanted it to be a real product that represented my career, that represented, I'm trying to be as modest as possible, but you have to believe in yourself, right? And so I had to believe that it came from a rather unique intellect or something, something like that. So the first thing I did was I got a real editor. I didn't self-edit it. And I promised myself that I wasn't going to bother the editor overtly with anything they wanted to change. So I onboarded probably 70% of the edits they suggested. I'm actually very proud to say that the editor is Jerry Corbley, my mother. And the reason I'm proud to say that is because she has an extremely long career in writing and journalism. She was actually the very first ever female freelance video journalist in Washington, D.C. And she's got shark's teeth. She doesn't hold back. And I knew that was also an advantage because I knew we could yell at each other and not take it personally. So for anyone looking to write a book, if someone in your family has editing experience, substantial editing experience, it's not a bad idea for that reason. So then I did find a publisher. I was just fortunate enough to hear about a guy on a podcast I listened to called The Tom Woods Show. His name is Germinal G. Van, and he was really inspiring to me because he's from the Ivory Coast. And he's just 30. He's like my age, and he immigrated to the United States at some point. And they speak French in the Ivory Coast. So I don't know when he learned English, but he's published 27 books on American political and economic history and philosophy. So real prodigy. And he started his own publishing company with the help of, or with the aim of helping first-time authors navigate a pretty hopeless industry right now because, Amazon has taken up so much publishing volume by publishing everybody's, small hobby books. And a lot of bookstores are closing down as a result. And so you essentially have huge publishers, huge bookstores, and it's just not particularly easy to get your foot in the door if you have nothing to show, if nobody invited you to write a book, give you a contract beforehand. I thought the contract he gave me was acceptable, and so we proceeded that way, and we did it just the two of us, the cover art, the front, the back matter and stuff. So it was a really nice experience. I would recommend his publishing company to any first-time authors.
That's awesome. Was the publishing process like very typical, or is the way that he set up his business like just a little bit more welcoming to anyone? Or like, did you have to send in a pitch, or how did that work for you? I
suspect it was easier, but it followed a trajectory that I had become. I knew, when I was a teenager, I used to play a lot of music, and I became familiar with the process of pitching music to record companies. And it was about the same, it's about the same, like you try to put together the best presentation of your work as possible, and then they say, we'll take a look at it and we'll write you back in 3 weeks. And when he did, he said the publishing process was essentially just me writing, every little scrap of copy, from the Amazon description to the inner flap to the, essentially everything was done by me, and then he put it all together. But aside from that, I didn't really have to do anything at all more. So that was actually it was really quite easy. In fact, the whole process, like I said, it is a small book, but I wrote it and it was accepted, and I finished all of the additional matter in 4 months. So,
wow, that's very impressive.
So really, yeah, like I said, I would really recommend the guy. I'm not sure if you're trying to make a lot of money, you might just want to try to go straight for Penguin Random House or something. But I thought it was a decent opportunity, and it was there, and I took it, and I didn't think too much about it, because what I really didn't want was to just have this manuscript, right? Like the archetypical Los Angeles screenplay writer who's like, I've got a script. Will you read my script? Just like walking around waving this manuscript at publishing companies. What I wanted was to, if I was going to do the book, if I was going to edit the book, if I was going to do it right, I would take the first opportunity and the easiest opportunity to get it published. Because what I wanted to do was hold it in my hand. Because if I couldn't hold it in my hand, then my son would be born, and I would just really lose momentum. And it could be months and months, maybe years, before I went through the process of getting it published. So Germinal was a real help in that regard.
Awesome. Yeah, and then what did it feel like to kind of reach that stage of like holding it in your hands for the first time, launching the book? What did all that stuff feel like?
Well, I think, not to be anticlimactic, but I think by that time I had already read it cover to cover like 7 times to, like doing the proofreading and stuff. So it was a little, and I selected the cover art, so it was a little anticlimactic. But no, it was really cool when here's a great story that illustrates how cool it was. It went on Amazon, and within a day, somebody had left a 5-star. I had obviously put it all over my social media accounts and stuff on my website. And within a day, somebody named Nathan, and I only know one Nathan, and it wasn't the same last name, but he had left a 5-star review saying, "Oh my God, I'm so jazzed to hear that Andy's travel experiences have been all put together. This is going to be a great read." And so I still don't know who that is. I just like to think that it was some person I met in a hostel and totally forgot about, but somehow they stood abreast of it. And then the other thing that was really cool was I submitted it to a rating agency, because again, I really wanted to take this project seriously. I didn't want it to just be something for me. I wanted to really do it like a proper author would. And so I submitted it to Reader's Favorite, which is an enormous American rating agency. And I got 5 out of 5 stars in 5 of the 6 categories. And they gave me a stamp to put on the front of your book, of my book. And the reviewer said, left a very long review. And at the end, she said, I can't recommend it highly enough. And so that for me was like the real coming to terms moment with the fact that I had succeeded. I had put out a really good product, and the idea that I had for the book to make it a journey into examining, to define that really unique experience, and then to explore these various aspects of travel that I'd always fascinated somebody else, and not just somebody else, but a person whose job it is to not be fascinated by books, essentially, because they have to be a critic.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's that just is like such a surreal moment, right? And it's one thing to like write something and publish something. It's another to like have it validated by like third parties that are like, yeah, you not only did this, but you did this really well. So I think that that's like a super cool and amazing achievement.
Did you ever have a moment like that in your professional life? Because another reason it's important to me is like, I never went to school, so I never had that diploma cap and gown moment. Like I've never had a real somebody in an industry says, you done it, kid.
Yeah, I mean, probably through school, and then I published a book at the end of last year as well.
It was yoga, right?
On yoga. Yeah, it's self-published, so maybe a little bit different, but I also felt like getting it in my hands, I was like, whoa, I did it. That's cool. And then as people have like read it and been like, oh, this is great, I'm like, oh, thank you. That's cool. So yeah, maybe similar to you, as well as I think with school, there's always that. I don't know if you feel that way about school.
Yeah, it is funny because it's very like a ritual moment of like crossing the stage and getting the diploma.
The like hat tie, they like flip your little tie over your hat when you like graduate from university. I feel like that was a good moment.
I feel like I remember just sitting there and being like, it's like Steve Adams, Tyler Adams, Jeremy Betrelli. God, we are so far away from the F's. This is going to take hours.
The F's are so far away from the Z's.
Awesome. And then, so when did the book officially come out? It was late last year, right?
December 2nd.
December 2nd. Awesome. I know kind of when you like finish a project like that, you often like turn the page, new ideas start coming. What kind of comes up for you next on like stuff you want to work on, whether it's books?
I like that question a lot. Yeah, right. That's what separates a good author from a bad author. Well, the good author already has his second book idea by the time the first book is published. So I have a few. The one I'm doing now is not going to be out anytime soon. I'm going to try to interview 24 of the most expansive and serial travelers that I can get contact information for, and just put together a book. So if on the face of it explores that triggering flow moment where you go, okay, now I'm traveling now, it's happening. There's another moment where when you as a traveler, you just get crushed by kindness. Somebody does something for you and you're just like, oh, and you go, can I give you money? Or like, and they go, no, I don't want any money. And it's a pretty ubiquitous, again, just like the other feeling, it's a pretty ubiquitous aspect of traveling. And it's something that virtually every traveler I've ever met has experienced some really bizarre demonstration of kindness when somebody went out of their way to help them. So I'm trying to find the most, extreme travelers I can get the contact information for and ask them to recount stories when they've received these sort of acts of inordinate kindness. I'm going to put them together in a book that tells the story of human kindness while examining it through the different forms that kindness and hospitality take when nested inside certain human cultures. So obviously the Middle East is an incredibly famous place for hospitality. That's not fair. The entire Islamic world is, certainly North Africa is in that sort of cultural sphere where the guest is God, as the Quran says. And so I've conducted probably 7 or 8 interviews so far with some really cool, people. I was able to speak with the Danish guy, Thor Peterson, a month after he had finished traveling to every country in the world without flying.
Oh, that's
so
cool.
I was able to debrief him, which was just exceptional. And that book's going well. I have some other ideas. I was thinking of doing it's dependent on the traveling I do from here on out. So, for example, I would like to write a travel log in verse, but that would require, I think, a longer trip than I'm disposed to embark upon with my son being just 10 months old. So those are some ideas I'm kind of kicking around, and but this kind of writing about travel, I don't want to do that for a good long time because I ran out of ideas faster than I thought I would writing on the face of it. And so I want to make sure that the net is totally full before I start another project. And if that means when I'm 57 or something, that's totally fine. I'm just going to let it come as and when it does. Because I think another problem with writing about travel literature, and I'll bet you guys can understand this because I know you're a fan of the man, is I always think of Anthony Bourdain, and I think of a guy who was able to write about travel and places, and what he had to say about it became more interesting than the place itself, which I think is what makes travel literature extremely difficult. Who is interested in what you have to say about Paris, right? Paris speaks for herself, and not a lot of people need to know what you did and how you thought it was, right? So when you have the ability to express certain human mental wanderings about a place, a country, a culture, a landscape, a phenomenon, an attraction, and you're able to express it in a way that's more engaging to a reader than just doing it, just going there, just seeing it, then you've got a real talent. And we've seen a few talents like that in our lives, just like there's great talents in all affairs. But that's one of the reasons why I took this project was really seriously, because I knew that there's so many reasons not to care what people, what many, many, many people write about travel. And I had to believe that what I had to say about it was somehow uniquely valuable or interesting. And so I really want to make sure that I don't push myself into any project, because I think as soon as I do, I will just begin to do this kind of stream of consciousness about what I thought when I was in Vienna or what I thought when I was in Southeast Asia. And it's just going to be, somebody will be reading the pages and think, oh, great, I'm going to go to Southeast Asia. And then they're not going to finish the book.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I feel like one of the things I'm curious about when it comes to On the Face of It is, maybe just some, and we can share with listeners where they can go to buy it and all that type of stuff. But I'm curious, some of your favorite, maybe highlights of the book, or favorite stories from the book. Like maybe you can just share like a couple little tidbits from the book that you really enjoy.
Well, can I ask, have either of you taken a look at it?
I've taken a look, but I haven't fully read it, in full disclosure.
I'm in a similar spot.
Well, I think if every podcast who interviewed a person who wrote a book had read the whole book, that would be, a pretty unreal world. That would be like a computer simulation. No, so there were a few parts that I could feel like the creative gears just go spinning, and I didn't have to think about what I was going to write first. And whatever I had down on the page was like reaching backwards years into, precise moments in my traveling experiences. And I could recall them with perfect detail. And there were a few moments like that, but more than actually travel experiences, I had a lot of fun elaborating and exploring some of the ways in which travel. The book is divided, for listeners interested in reading it, the book is divided in two parts. The first part examines the traveler and sort of the act of traveling. And the second part explores the effect that travelers have in the world through a variety of the most common topics. So there's war, religion, politics, geography, time, nature, stuff like that. And I really enjoyed writing a lot of those things because it kind of reflected just my entire intellectual upbringing in the Western canon. And I was able to explore that with a lot of satisfactory, vigor. And the best example of that is chapter 12, chapter 8, 8. Is where I explore the idea of what turns an ethnic group into a culture, and a culture into a people, and a people into a nation state. And which of those have happened in our, in this civil, this epoch, this post-World War II era, and which ones of those have happened organically, which ones have been, happened politically, which ones have been called rebellions, which ones have been called independence, which ones have been sanctioned by the UN, which ones have been looked at as, for some reason, illegitimate claims to statehood. And I just start talking like, well, look, if the people in... What were the examples I gave? I can't exactly remember. Perhaps a good example might be Russia and Belarus. So are the differences between the people of Russia and Belarus greater than the differences between, an example I use in the book is the Dai, which is an ethnic group in southern China, and the Han Chinese? And the answer would be they are way different, more different than Russians and Belarusians. And you could say sort of the same about, there's a lot of these sorts of things. You could say the same sort of similar thing about is Zimbabwe and South Africa. Are the people in those countries more different than, say, the Spanish and the Basque, which is another example I use? I mean, the Basque, everybody who goes to northern France or southern France, northern Spain, knows that it's inhabited by a people who consider themselves entirely unique, like the oldest, continuously living race in Europe. And the Basque language is a language isolate, which means that it has no links to any other Proto-European language. And so some of those intellectual things, I lean very hard towards limited government, and so writing the chapter on politics was full of lovely, witty, recountings of stories I've heard from taxi drivers and hoteliers complaining about the regulatory environment and things like that. And that was really fun to do. I loved exploring time, which I do in several points, because I think time is such a critical aspect to how we conceptualize travel. In chapter 3, I mention how it's impossible for the human mind to conceptualize 8 hours of doing nothing. So we don't tend to remember them or preview them. And if you think about going to wherever, you'll go to Myanmar, right? The problem with Myanmar is all the roads go north to south, and sometimes that's not always convenient. Or obviously not all the roads, but you might have to go 200 kilometers south before you can turn east to just go a few kilometers to the east to go to where you're trying to get to. And so you think only really about the nice things you'll see in Myanmar, because you don't have a way of conceptualizing what it'll be like to sit on a bus and do nothing for 8 hours. And so, but other than, travelers are constantly aware of time. We're aware of the check-in, the check-out, lunch, business hours, the departure, how many days are left, when does night fall. We're constantly carving up our day by these measures of time. I really enjoyed exploring, which was not anything I had intended to do when I started writing the book, but I just tried to see if I could make an argument for a biological, genetic origin for the travel bug. And that was a real fun exercise. And then the last thing I'll say was, if you read the book, the second to last chapter, Friedrich Nietzsche had a really wonderful line, and I think about it a lot, where he said quite simply, "Es denkt in mir," which in the context that he was using it in means something is thinking in me. And what he was describing was the phenomenon of when ideas come into your head that seem so strange or so sudden that they almost seem foreign. Something's thinking in me. And so the second to last chapter was kind of that. I just started writing about something I had noticed happening to me, where I had traveled enough in my life to start kind of seeing. I started to and maybe other travelers will know what I'm talking about because I'm not doing a good job of explaining it, but I would start to see in people I would meet, people I had met before. And I would my brain was able to conceptualize vast things. Like I could see the whole Kuala Lumpur skyline, and I felt I could imagine every single person in the whole city. And I just started writing. And what came out was this really wonderful philosophical idea that I never imagined I was capable of writing, about how the travel kind of shrinks the world, but also expands it. So at the same time, in this enormously strange way, that's what I'll say. It's strange. I feel like I can see every human in the eyes of every other human. And I feel like I've had the same you have the same conversations 1,000 times with 1,000 different people, and they begin to run over they run through your head every subsequent time you have them, right? When somebody asks, "Oh, where are you from?" "I'm an American." "What do you do?" "I'm a journalist." I begin to see every person I've ever had that conversation with. So those would be some really, good examples of things that I walked away really, really happy with.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing those. Sounds awesome. And I just love hearing that, you you've got like a unique take on traveling and seeing the world, which is one of the things that I think we really appreciate about your book. I'm definitely excited to dive in and read more of it. And so I'm curious on that note, if people want to purchase On the Face of It, where can they go to find it?
So all the links to all the ways to buy it, you can find at ggvpublishingcompany.com. You can also find us on Amazon. My author name is my legal name, Andrew Corbley. On the Face of It, A Traveler Around His World. There's only one other book with a title called On the Face of It. So I got pretty fortunate there. But it's great. It's a little bendable paperback. You can stuff it in a backpack in a hurry. You can mark it up with pen because it only costs $12 American for the paperback version. And if you do buy the book, you're supporting a really wonderful publishing company in Germinal G. Van's publishing company, because they helped me out a lot, and it's not going to Simon & Schuster or anything, huge New York-based publishing company. You're helping an immigrant who has really fallen in love with our country, helped me out a lot, and it's just a great little small business in the publishing industry. I'm hoping to have it on shelves, literal shelves, soon. We'll have to see what the American Wholesale Book Company says in my application. But if they say what everybody else has said, it'll be a big fat yes. So in that case, you'll be able to find it soon at Books A Million and other retailers.
Awesome. Well, you'll have to keep us posted on that. But yeah, we'll make sure there's links for that in the show notes. And just really thrilled for you, Andy. This is really awesome. Congrats on this amazing achievement. We're super stoked for you and super stoked to be able to share this with listeners.
Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate you having me on to do a bit of a plug, if I can call it that. But I also want to let the listeners know what, how can I say, the integrity of your hosts is really quite something, because I had sent Ryan an advanced PDF copy of the book, and he wrote me back saying he had bought a copy anyway. So you really, by listening to this podcast, you support some really wonderful people who I'm very pleased to count among my friendly, distant acquaintances. And so thank you once again. Love talking with you. Hope we can talk again soon.
Yeah,
Thanks, Andy.
Absolutely. Thanks, Andy.